Welcome XRP fans. I hope everybody's doing great and had a great Christmas. We still have New Year's just around the corner, and 2026 is definitely looking like a great year for XRP holders. Could XRP explode over 330% in the months ahead? Standard Chartered seems to think so. They've made a bold claim that we're going to look into in this video. Also, once again, David Sachs, the crypto czar for the US, has made another golden age remark, referring to a crypto golden age upon us. We're going to look into that. Also, if you've been following Ripple and XRP for many years, you're most likely familiar with David Schwartz. Well, he's stepping down as Chief Technology Officer, but the good news is he's still going to be much involved with Ripple. I put together a bunch of clips throughout the years as a tribute to David Schwartz. So, if you're a Ripple and XRP fan, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Let's go. Standard Chartered predicts a 330% increase in price for XRP next year. Standard Chartered's Jeffrey Kendrick boasts of an XRP price of $8, owing to increased regulatory clarity and progress on XRP ETFs. Jeffrey Kendrick, the global head of digital asset research at Standard Chartered Bank, recently issued an extremely bullish price prediction for XRP. So Kendrick's bullish prediction is driven by a couple different things. One being the SEC's dropping of its appeal against Ripple, and also the approval of spot exchange traded funds, or ETFs, linked to XRP. After continuous legal drama, the SEC finally decided to stop and drop its appeal against Ripple in August of this year, late this year. Now, the exciting good news is that led to the XRP ETFs. Several lending companies like Franklin Templeton, Canary, 21 Shares, Bitwise, and Grayscale launched spot XRP ETFs in the US soon after. As per the on-chain analysis from the past couple days, we've seen an inflow of $1.14 billion of XRP ETF inflows. That's incredible, and the party's just getting started. Now, given such positive developments, Standard Chartered's Jeffrey Kendrick predicted that XRP will hit a price target of around $8 in 2026. I happen to agree with him because we have regulatory clarity around XRP as a financial asset. I also want to add that we have the Clarity Act, which is coming into law beginning of next year. So we also have the great news of the ETFs, and we're going to see more ETFs in the near future. So I believe that this is the perfect storm. Brad Garlinghouse himself made a statement recently. He sees Bitcoin at $180,000 by the end of next year. So that alone would make the price of XRP much higher than it is. But if you combine the Clarity Act, more ETFs, more attention, more mainstream adoption, it's only a matter of time before the price goes, I think, over 330%. We have exciting words from crypto czar David Sachs. He stated that the golden age is here after going over some economic numbers. He also made a similar statement at the beginning of 2025, early in the year. He stated that the crypto golden age is upon us. Now, those are strong words from a strong position, helping to ignite the crypto industry in the United States. This man is at the forefront of this revolution. David Schwartz, the Chief Technology Officer of Ripple, has recently announced that he is stepping down from his day-to-day executive role by the end of this year, which is just a few days away. Now, he's not leaving the company entirely, which is great news. Instead, he will transition to a seat on the board of directors. Now, there's primary reasons why he's stepping down. One of them is work-life balance. After a 40-year career, 13 at Ripple, he wants to spend more time with his family and on hobbies that he loves. Now, there's also a strategic shift with the company. He feels that the company is stable and it's in place where he can hand off operational duties to the next generation of leaders. Over the years of being the Chief Technology Officer at Ripple, David Schwartz has made some exciting comments in the early days, like this one, that really kept the XRP community excited. He states here that XRP is an asset that can be used for settlement. It's kind of like gold that can instantly teleport around the world. It does actually move value, and there's nothing to settle afterwards. Let's certainly not forget this remark he made a while back. This really got the XRP army and community going. This is referring to the price of XRP. He states that it can't be dirt cheap. That doesn't make any sense. If XRP costs $1, they would need 1 million XRP, which would cost $1 million. If XRP costs $1 million, they need 1 XRP, which would again cost $1 million. Now, if you look at the total world and the amount of money that is flowed through it every day, if you look at even the total supply of XRP, it just doesn't make sense for it to be dirt cheap. Now, what does this mean for Ripple and the community? Although his departure of the CTO sparks an important moment, he will still be heavily involved in Ripple's successful future. His steps back mark an end of an era for Ripple, but not the end of his influence and say. David Schwartz has created a legacy of building the XRP Ledger. The time Schwartz has spent with Ripple can be traced back to 2011 when he became one of the cryptographers. Together with co-founders Arthur Brito, Jeb McCaleb, and Chris Larson, he was involved in designing and coding the XRP Ledger, which is currently one of the most popular blockchain platforms in the world. In 2018, he officially became the Chief Technology Officer, or CTO, of Ripple. Now, let's watch some of these clips throughout the years, some funny and some very informative, as a tribute to David Schwartz. Joel Katz.
It's such a pleasure to be here in Amsterdam addressing the entire XRPL developer community. I love Amsterdam. I haven't been here in a couple of years. I tell people it's because of the pandemic, but actually it's because marijuana is legal in most of the states now. No, I know Americans, when we think about Amsterdam, all we tend to think about is, drugs. So many people taking drugs, riding bicycles. I thought I was at the Tour de France. No, seriously though, there is a huge cryptocurrency and cryptography community in Amsterdam. A lot of you people may not know this, but we're actually less than a kilometer from the lab that developed the world's strongest hash. So, no, not right. No, you don't like that one. No. So we were down to either Amsterdam or Abu Dhabi, and I asked our events team whether they knew where the event was going to be, and they said they were worried some of the attendees might get stoned. I'm like, that doesn't narrow it down. All right, I could tell jokes all day, but we got a lot of content to go through, and I'd like to keep my job. I'm the CTO at Ripple. I get to work with amazing people, both inside Ripple and, of course, in the greater community. I mean, it's truly fantastic.
But let me talk a little bit about what digital currencies are, just so that we kind of have the scope. They're rooted in blockchains, and by blockchains, I almost literally just mean chains of blocks. I think this is an important thing too, that the term blockchain has become somewhat muddied. It's a data structure. It's literally a chain of blocks. To be a little bit more precise, what a blockchain is it's a system in which you have data structures that show the state transitions in the system. So a blockchain is a fancy name for a database. It changes state. And those state changes are documented in blocks that allow anybody to check the validity of those state changes. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. There are no system administrative functions. Bitcoin doesn't have an administrative function. XRP doesn't have an administrative function. Litecoin doesn't have administrative functions. Ethereum, there's no administrative functions. Everybody accesses the system on an equal plane. They have some portions of this, they have maybe their own assets, but they have privileged access to their own assets, but that's it. Nobody has privileged access to anybody else's assets. And rules are public. In other words, every one of us in this room can tell if a Bitcoin transaction is valid. We don't need to ask anybody else. That's important, and state is public. And I think the most important thing, if you ask me, like, what is the breakthrough in Bitcoin? What is the aha? What is the insight? What is the magic secret sauce? It is that last bullet point, that all participants can enforce the rules. What that means is if you run a Bitcoin full node, and this is true of pretty much every blockchain, the only way for someone to say, I have a Bitcoin, is to demonstrate to you that they have that Bitcoin in compliance with the system's rules. Every individual participant can enforce those system rules, and that means that anything that violates those rules is essentially impossible. Obviously, a bug might allow us to, a bug might mean that the software doesn't enforce the rules we think it does. Bitcoin has had 2 of those, but we fix them and we move on, and hopefully the number of those bugs is finite. But the fear of a bug specifically targeting you log into your bank and your money's gone, and you say to the bank, what happened to my money? Imagine if the bank couldn't tell you your money was gone without proving that you authorized the transfer of it. That is a huge difference that eliminates any number of threat models and cost associated with software development. And that's one of the reasons that I think blockchain could be a data structure that could become much more popular in many types of applications where a huge fraction of the difficulty of the implementation and operation is ensuring that the system's rules aren't violated. If you imagine you build a system and you deploy it, part of the cost of operating that system, let's say you use a traditional centralized database, part of the cost of operating that system is making sure that that centralized database isn't compromised, because if the database is compromised, everybody listens to what it says. If you don't trust any centralized database, that whole problem just goes away. And I think centralized databases have been oversold. We've been told, oh, that's a solved problem, just use a centralized database. They're not cheap. They're not reliable. No major blockchain has had any downtime in the past 2 or 3 years. What centralized database service can say that?
So a guy is walking home from work one day, and he's kind of thirsty, and he walks past the bar. He's like, oh, I'll just stop in the bar and get a drink. So he stops in the bar, gets a drink, and he notices a guy dressed as a pirate at the other end of the bar. And I mean the whole deal. The hook hand, the eye patch, the peg leg, the costume, like every bit of the pirate. And he walks up to the guy, he's like, you are the most convincing pirate I've ever seen, man. That costume is incredible. The guy says, costume? I can't do a pirate voice. I won't even try. The guy says, costume? I'm a pirate. He's like, no, there aren't pirates anymore. It's like, oh, no, there still are. We're still around. You don't hear much about us. Not as famous as we used to be, but there's still pirates around. So he says, still pirates, eh? He says, yeah. So he says, all right. How'd you get the peg leg? He says, well, I was in a battle. Sword fighting is what pirates do. And my leg got cut off. And when you're a pirate, your leg gets cut off, you get a peg leg. It's like, I don't know that I believe that. I don't know what I expected, but whatever. So how'd you get the hook hand? He says, well, I was in another battle. I was a little unsteady because of the peg leg. You know how it is. And just cut my arm right off. You know what happens when you get your arm cut off when you're a pirate? You get a hook hand. He says, all right, okay. I don't know that I believe that, but I don't know what I expected either, so whatever. I guess I got it to ask, how'd you get the eye patch? He said, you're not going to believe it. It was the very next day. We were coming into port, and I heard a fluttering sound above me. And I looked up, and a seagull just relieved itself right in my eye. The guy's like, wait a minute. The peg leg, okay. How else do you get a peg leg? I don't even know. The hook hand, I guess, yeah, you lose your hand, you get a hook hand. But you expect me to believe that you're wearing that eye patch because a seagull relieved itself in your eye. He said, you got to remember, it was my first day with the hook.
A little bit of your background. How did you go from programming calculators to cryptography at the NSA to crypto assets and then to Ripple?
I guess I discovered Bitcoin in 2011. I had been working on cryptography for secure messaging, cloud storage for customers like the NSA and various governments and military organizations. And when I first saw Bitcoin, it was one of those things where you could almost call it love at first sight. Like I saw the technology and I thought, wow, there's really something here. And I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about it. And I found the communities and I looked at the source code. And I happened to be a little bit lucky that there was a problem at the time. This was just around the rise of mining pools, and the software was never designed to handle mining pools. So there were a lot of people who were complaining about performance issues in the software. And one of the things that I'd specialized in was improving the performance of software. And I saw these bounties. Mining pools were like, I'll pay 10 Bitcoins if someone can fix this problem. I'll kick in 15 Bitcoins if someone can solve this problem. And they were worth about $15 a piece, so that was real money. And it's kind of hard to understand a complicated piece of code just randomly exploring it, like having some sort of an objective, something that guides you, because otherwise it's sometimes hard to know what's the next step. Like, what do you just look at some random chunk of code? What do you explore? So I explored from the direction of solving that problem that mining pools had, and I solved the problem, and they paid the bounties. And it's kind of funny, when I went to buy a house in Oakland, I used the bounties as the deposit, and it was the first time Wells Fargo ever had to do the provenance of funds. So they actually went to the old posts on the Bitcoin forum where people had offered the bounties and I'd claimed it. And I kind of fell in love with Bitcoin because of the lack of the need for a sort of central operator or a central point of trust. It was already becoming apparent that like centralization, particularly in we saw the revolution of the internet sort of decentralizing the control of information, where anybody who had an idea could tell anybody who wanted to hear it about that idea. We've backslid on that in the past couple of years, and new centralized arbiters of information flow have kind of emerged. But at the time, it was tremendously empowering, and the idea that you could do something similar with the flows of funds, if you think about the way countries like North Korea use the control over the flow of information, or used to, I think people in North Korea thought that Kim Jong-il was like a respected intellectual in the West when the truth was completely the opposite. But if you're the only person who can talk to your people, you have tremendous control over what they think. If you tell them that the United States is filled with poor people living in the streets and we have it better here, and they'll believe it because they don't have those other sources of information. And the internet was a very powerful force for good in democratizing the flow of information. And today, control of the flow of funds is used in that same way. If you look at Venezuela, like if you can cause the currency to become worthless, that allows you a significant amount of control over people's lives. And the ability of the technology to change that is what really excited me. And it's been 6 years since then, 7 years since then, and we have not delivered on that promise yet, but I'm still very optimistic that the technology will deliver on that kind of promise.
And what were you looking to do when you went to Ripple, when you were part of the birth of Ripple?
So when we looked at Bitcoin, I think a lot of people in the community thought that the proof of work was like the secret sauce or the magic element in Bitcoin. And what I and a few other people, Jed McCaleb, realized this first, is that and that was a key insight of his that led to the formation of the XRP Ledger and ultimately Ripple, was his insight that proof of work was not the secret sauce. The secret sauce of Bitcoin is that all of the state information is public. The ledger is completely public. You can see every transaction, every balance, everything is public. And what that means is that you don't have to take anybody else's word for anything. Like if someone submits a transaction, you can check if it's valid. You can figure out what it does all by yourself. And that was the sort of decentralization magic, and that proof of work was just the way that it solved the double spend problem. The idea that, if I have one Bitcoin, what if I try to send it to two different people? How do we figure out which one? And that kind of led to this idea that there might be other ways to solve the double spend problem that might have different characteristics from Bitcoin. They might be cheaper, they might be faster, they might be worse, but they might be better for some use cases. And this idea that we should try to explore, I guess an analogy I sometimes use is if you discovered an alien artifact and it did something amazing. Like the first thing that you would try to figure out is how does it do that amazing thing? Does it have like something? You guys have probably seen Black Panther, right? Like they have a metal that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, and that's how they do all this magic stuff. So does it have some secret thing that nobody else has? Or is it an incredibly clever arrangement of parts that we understand and sort of take it apart and then think, well, how else can we put those parts together? What else can we use that secret sauce for to solve other problems?
And how do you see the XRP Ledger being used beyond payments?
Well, so today the primary use case, at least that Ripple's interested in, is international payments, settling cross-currency payments, because it's really, really good at that. But there are definitely other companies that are looking at using the same technology for other applications, and it's very hard to know what the right use cases are. I sometimes joke about, like, if we were talking about email in the early 90s, we might have said, well, maybe if it's wildly successful, it'll capture the 40% of postal mail that isn't like a package and isn't super personal like a wedding invitation. But obviously, if you look at your emails, 98% of them would never have been postal mails under any circumstances. They're completely new and different things. So it's very hard to say. I'm excited about some of these interesting financial use cases that are starting, at least for the short term, the focus seems to be on financial use cases because that's where this idea of centralized control is such a problem.
Ripple is focused on international payments right now, which is where the high friction is. And I would say that what we're working on is kind of getting enterprise customers together, mostly financial institutions, banks and non-banks, and allowing them to negotiate their payments on a network directly, bypassing things like SWIFT or things that take multiple days to settle and allowing them to settle instantly.
Yeah, this has been the narrative for a few years because I've talked to your CEO, Brad, fairly often, and he's made the case this is a way for banks to save money, use XRP as kind of a bridge currency. But I got to say, it doesn't seem to be happening. It seems every year this is kind of the promise, but we're not seeing a lot of adoption. What's going on there?
I would agree that adoption of digital assets has been a little slower, or you could see it as being incredibly quick or incredibly slow, depending on what time frame you think is reasonable. I would say revolutionizing international finance is not something that you would expect to happen overnight. But it is a multi-step process, and I think the first problem that we encountered, we kind of thought that we could take a direct line to settling with a digital asset, and I think a lot of people thought that, well, now we have digital assets, let's just use them for payments, and that'll be that. Part of the problem is that the payment systems are just not capable of supporting instantaneous settlement. So if you think about a payment system like SWIFT, where you just kind of push a payment message out, and you don't necessarily know the entire path, and you don't know the fees until later, you don't even know if the destination account even exists until sometime later when the payment is actually processed by the destination institution. There's no way that you could build instantaneous settlement into a system like that. So we kind of found ourselves in this situation where if we wanted institutions to settle their international payments with a digital asset, we first had to rebuild the payment messaging, sort of the plumbing. And we discovered something interesting on the way. What we discovered was that the existing plumbing was so bad, it dates back to batch computing days, that just improving that messaging was a product. That was something that banks and non-bank financial institutions would be interested in. And so we focused on building a top-notch payment network that can settle with a digital asset.
Hey, what's up? I'm Reinhard Kate, and welcome to episode 19 of The Drop. We've got a very XRP-focused episode. We've got David Schwartz on to talk about the XRP Ledger. David, give me some context on the XRP Ledger, where it started and where we are today.
Well, I started working on what we now call the XRP Ledger at the end of 2011. So I've been at this for, 8-9 years now. It kind of feels like forever. But the changes have been drastic. In the early days, all we had was the ability to perform a transaction on a decentralized ledger in just a couple of seconds. And then we started to realize that the properties of the algorithms that we developed allowed us to do things like a decentralized exchange. And then we had this idea of allowing people to issue assets and ideas like community credit. And we put all that together into a functional system probably in mid-2012.
Why is robustness so important today with so many payment providers and financial networks that are depending on the XRP Ledger?
You have to realize that you're talking about billions of dollars in a system that doesn't have an administrator. There's nobody that you can go to if it messes up. And so reliability is the number one property. And it means that these systems are very slow to develop and evolve. In the early days, before I was working on the XRP Ledger and I was looking at Bitcoin, and we sort of had this idea that if there was any new feature, Bitcoin would just adopt it. We now know that that's hopelessly naive because any change to a system like this imposes costs on everybody who uses the system. With any other piece of software, a company will release a new version of the software. Say Oracle releases a new version, and they'll say to people who have mission critical deployments, don't upgrade to the new version. Just use the current version, give us a little bit of time, test it, whatever. You can't really do that on a public blockchain. If the rules change, people have to run software with the new rules. If you want to ask why these systems don't move more quickly, why they don't add features on a regular basis, that's why.
You've suggested changes for the XRP Ledger. Can you give us an overview of what those changes are and what they might mean for the network?
I've suggested a bunch of changes that fall into several different categories. One of those categories is like core consensus improvements. One of the things that I've said a lot is that proof of work is kind of a technological dead end. It works fine. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that there hasn't been any significant innovation in it. There are also changes that are in the form of new features. One of the features that I think is very exciting is a feature that would allow people to launch stablecoins are the obvious use case, but it's not just stablecoins. It's essentially assets pegged to some external value. Features similar to that exist on other systems, but the interesting thing about this is that the liquidity is guaranteed by the ledger mechanics.
Good morning, Amsterdam. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really special, Brad and David, because I think in the 10 or some odd years you've been working together, you've never shared a stage.
That's true. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, is there some practical...
We did this for you.
Well, I appreciate the gift, early birthday present.
When's your birthday?
It's in like 2 months, but...
It's because we don't like each other.
Well, maybe we can start there. Obviously, it's not a lot of people can say that they work with someone for this amount of time. Have you guys ever disagreed on anything as it pertains to XRPL or Ripple in this time? And how have you gone over maybe some of those disagreements?
The only thing I can think of that we've really disagreed on at times is sort of how much Ripple can do. How many projects can we take on? Is it a small number of things that we think are really big, or a large number of things that we think are interesting, but not necessarily, not necessarily world-changing? So this is sort of the scope. And of course, that's evolved over time as Ripple's resources have evolved.
I'll just add, I truly say this, I'm not just saying because he's sitting here, but I think David Schwartz is one of the smartest people I've ever met. And so it's really hard to disagree with someone that you think is that smart. Like, if I disagree, it's like, okay, I'm doing something wrong.
No, I actually do warn people frequently that I can be very persuasive even when I'm wrong.
He does.
So they should actually be careful.
He has done that to me.
Because if I'm wrong and I persuade Brad that I'm right, that benefits nobody.
But look, I think he's incredibly smart, incredibly passionate. His more recent adoption of trying to be a comedian on Twitter, I'm less impressed with. We sometimes disagree with his. I did call him a number of times, encouraging him to think about things he was posting on Twitter.
My wife keeps threatening to buy me new joke books.
You've got your wife on one side and Brad on the other trying to rein you in to no avail. Let's maybe talk about the evolution of Ripple as a firm and XRPL. How has it changed, right, in terms of what people might think of it and what it's sort of become today?
I think from the earliest stages, some things have remained constant. Very early on, we decided we weren't trying to be a consumer outreach play. We wanted to play at kind of the infrastructure enterprise side of things. And early on when I joined the company, and David predates me by a couple of years, when I joined Ripple, we were trying to do a number of things around smart contracts with Codius, around identity. Just listening to David speak this morning, it's interesting to see thematically how some of these things are still relevant and still omnipresent. But we decided to really focus on payments at the time. As David has suggested, we have subsequently kind of expanded beyond that. We now have, at the time when I joined, we had about 80 people. Now we have hundreds and hundreds of people. And so I feel like we can do more things. But I will say, I think the culture of Ripple, I hope we continue. And frankly, the culture of the whole XRP community, which has just been phenomenal, is like, how do you create small groups who get a lot of shit done?
We need products that meet needs that real people actually have. One of the things that I mentioned in my talk is, like, for most of us, we're very well connected to the financial system, and getting money into and out of a blockchain is not difficult for us. But if you're someone who, doesn't have a whole bunch of money that you can just, send off and not be able to get to for a while, on-ramps and off-ramps are critical, interoperability, like all of those things. But really what it comes down to is just the user experience has to be great, and it has to solve a problem people actually have. It can't just be interesting. It's like, oh, it's really cool that it can do this thing, right? It has to solve a problem people actually have.
Ownership and a deep connection to what's going on in the XRP Ledger space, and it is just it's actually very emotional for me and very moving to see, what it's turned into. It's been more than a 10-year journey now. And
could you have predicted this was the direction it was going to take when you set out to build it?
I hope that it would grow into something big and something meaningful, but obviously there's no way that I could have possibly predicted, what that would be. So, and I'm constantly surprised.
Yeah. We're sitting here at Apex 2025, and a lot of folks from different aspects of the Ripple ecosystem here. We have institutional players. You and I were talking. There are retail investors here. There are folks who are building on the chain. Talk to me about witnessing these community members coming together. What does that mean for you to see folks from really kind of different sides of the spectrum come together?
I think that's one of the great things about Apex. Apex was originally envisioned as a developer get-together, primarily for people who were building to share, technical insights and talk about strategy for, future development. And then it expanded to include retail XRP holders and people who are just enthusiastic about the space and interested in the technology. And I think the big change this year is that you see representatives of institutions who are looking to bring things like tokenized real-world assets onto the blockchain. And I think that
that's that's the big thing that's going to catalyze that next wave of adoption, that real mass growth that we're all hoping to see.
Talk to me about the innovation that's happening. And you're the co-creator of the chain, so I want to get into your head a little bit. What are some of the most important innovations that are happening on XRP Ledger?
I think that if we are going to see the sort of mass adoption of the blockchain space and DeFi, broadly speaking, it's going to have to provide the kind of financial services that ordinary people need. You know, collectibles are great, and speculation in very high-risk assets is interesting. But you know, if you think about what people need a financial system for, they need things like loans, they need payments, they need sensible investments, you know, retirement funds, all of those kinds of things. And I think the most exciting developments are the ones that are going to build those pieces that we need for the DeFi and blockchain space to really take a bite out of that multi-trillion-dollar TradFi market.
From a technical perspective, what needs to happen for us to get there?
I think the big thing is being able to support things like tokenized real-world assets, portfolios of loans, fractional ownership, all of the sort of complexities around the real-world holding of assets. If we can do that, then I think we can compete with TradFi, and that's like, you know, that's a multi-trillion-dollar market. It's, you know, hundreds of times the current DeFi market.